Hey guys, Peter Shankman. Good to have you here again for another 20 minutes in lockdown. I am live this day, not from my kitchen where I've been for the past 6 months, but from my bedroom, because when you homeschool, you don't have control over what part of the apartment you get. And what used to be my daughter at her desk in her office is now my daughter. Well, I need the living room, Daddy, because it's the only place we can do our gymnastics, because they have gymnastics class. So there we go. Okay. Enough about me. Let's introduce Joseph Cephas. Joseph is the SVP over at Novita PR, an agency in New York, and he is talking primarily today. We're here about diversity in all its forms: diversity in skin color, diversity in sexual orientation, diversity in the brain, neurodiversity, things like that. Welcome, Joseph. Good to have you, man.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So you're here today out of Brooklyn.
Yeah. Out of Brooklyn, Fort Greene, Brooklyn, recording.
Same hazy skies over there that I got looking out my window as well. So that's all good.
Yes, hazy skies. Yeah, it's weird.
So tell me about diversity. Tell me why it's important to you. Tell me how you how that became sort of your niche, as it were.
Sure. So I've been in PR marketing my entire career. I was doing it for many different associations, working out of Washington, D.C. And then I came into the American Society of Interior Designers, where I was their VP of Marketing and Branding. And the design community was very large. We had over 25,000 members, the design community of every sector of, residential to commercial, doing things like airports and design of all types of buildings, and that conversation of we spend 93% of our time indoors was, which is crazy to think about, that we spend that much of our lives indoors, and now we're even more time indoors.
I was going to say, that was previous, right?
Yeah, that was, if you think that 93% of our lives are indoors, and then this year is going to throw that number off even more. But this way that space affects you is huge, and it's something that a lot of people don't think about. But then when I looked at designers and I looked at the architecture community, there's a real lack of diversity in the people that are creating these space. So that underrepresentation was a real issue. And that really started to become what I was speaking about, of like trying to dissect that issue of why that's the case. The people building these spaces, why are only 2% of ASID members? Why were they Black? Why was that number so low? In the entire design community, why was it only 6%? Architects, why was it down around 4%? Then when you look at Black women, only make up 0.3% of licensed architects. So I'm like, the importance of these buildings, why is there such a lack of diversity? So I then when I moved to Novita, while we're a PR firm, but we specialize in architecture and design. We have a lot of both on the manufacturing side and architects and designers, in addition to other sectors as well. But this was something that really hit home for me, especially after the murder of George Floyd. So like after that, I immediately, within 48 hours, I turned around and put together a panel discussion with leaders in the design community, and we got over 500 people to register really quickly, and that really started me on the path of really like I'm like, I haven't changed what I've been saying, but now people are listening because of what happened to George Floyd.
And in from an architecture perspective, it's a legacy that lasts hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you look at, I'm looking out my window right now, and I'm seeing everything from the Worldwide Plaza to the two middle fingers on 57th Street, to the Time Warner Center, and all those buildings have gone up in the past 20, 25 years. And they'll be Cravath was up, or Worldwide Plaza was up in the 70s, but everything else has been over the past 20 years, and they'll be here for the next 50. Mm-hmm. And so, it's a legacy that lives, and a not very diverse one at that.
Yeah, and that's when you think about that, and you try to dissect why is that the issue, why is it the issue, and the lack of diversity is in every industry. Every industry has been wrestling with this problem for many years, but I'm like, why is it so much worse when it comes to this in the buildings that we live in? That lack of diversity, that lack of representation, because there's so much of the space that we live in, it's storytelling. There's so many stories that are told through those buildings, and then you get even deeper into, there's so many buildings that were built that Black people helped create, going back into the 1700s and the 1800s, even go back to the 1600s, that they have no credit for,
Right.
that Black people play a significant role in. There's just no credit.
So what did you discover, in the research that you've done and been doing?
Yeah, so I mean, it's many, many, many different issues. I think one of the biggest things is the lack of presenting it as an option at a young age. I think that architecture and design is not presented to diverse communities as an option, as a career. So like that. And that pipeline, building that pipeline for years to come. And then there's the lack of representation in leadership roles right now. So young Black kids don't see people that look like them in the leadership positions in this sector. So then they're not going to go after that because they're like, there's no opportunities there. I always say that like no matter what your political affiliation is, there's a huge group of kids who, once they saw President Obama, they were like, oh, I can be president. Like they were like, I can do that because somebody that looks like me has actually done that. And that's why it's so important and that's why we celebrate so much diverse people that have been pioneers, because then there's a whole group of people behind them that are like, oh, I can actually do this.
Well, I mean, it's the same aspect when Sally Ride became our first female astronaut.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers of applications over the next 5 years of females to NASA was something like 72% higher than it had ever been.
Yes.
Right. Same thing when the first Asian, I believe it was Roger Ozutnik, became, unfortunately he was on Challenger, but it was again, you saw those numbers go up. So that's a very, very sharp point. But you look at it along the lines of what can companies today, small businesses who are out there who say, okay, I've been watching everything that's been going on. I'm not okay with it, and I want to make change. What do I do?
Yeah, and that's something that we've been trying to answer that question as much as possible. It's just there's been so many questions of, okay, what do we do now? Like where your attention has been grabbed, you're starting to recognize the issue, and you're like, okay, what can I do? And I think it always starts with hiring practices. And there's even been that question of people that are saying, you know what, I want to do better. I haven't been getting any applicants, for my positions that are diverse. And I'm like, well, part of it is, is that you're not looking in different places. There's so much hiring that happens that's word of mouth, friends of friends, somebody knows somebody coming out of school, internships, even, like, are you looking at schools and programs that have diverse backgrounds? When hiring and when looking at Black candidates, it's so often that people, I don't always think it's intentional, but they look at, with Black candidates, what they can't do. When it's white candidates, they look at what they can do. They focus on the strengths and they're like, okay, they can do this. They might have some shortfalls here, but it doesn't matter. Look at these strengths. When it's a Black candidate, they're like, okay, here are their weaknesses. And don't focus on those strengths. So it's just like, you have to start looking in different places, and you have to look at the strengths, because the strengths may be different than the traditional potential hire that you've had in the past.
It's a really interesting point. I remember I was working with a bank. They were trying to improve their market share in lower income. They repped primarily middle income, and they were looking to expand to lower income. That's how they wanted to help. And they said, but we don't know. We can't get any idea of what they're looking for. And I said, well, create an advisory board. Create an advisory board of the people. And so I come back and I'd finish my thing, and they say, yeah, we'll implement that. I came back 4 months later. I'm like, so, show me the advisory board. And it was like 15 white kids from the most expensive college in the area. I'm like, oh my God, how stupid are you? It's sitting there right in front of your face. That's then the options are there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that if you take off the glasses and look just a little bit further than where you are sort of, it's funny. I used to call it, so I went to high school in Manhattan, and I slept on Staten Island because my parents, for some reason, lived there. And I always had to take the ferry. And I joked that all the people who took the ferry on Staten Island from Staten Island to Manhattan knew the ferry and the 4 blocks around their office.
Mm-hmm.
They knew nothing else about Manhattan. And it was this incredibly narrow-minded way of thinking, right? You have the arts, you have opera, you have ballet, you have the museums, but all you know is the video store and deli around your office. right? So yeah, it always comes back to moving around a little bit, opening up your eyes a little bit more. Oren actually had a question I want to pose. What is more important, diversity, gender, age, race, or blindly hiring the best candidate? No in-person interview based on resume and telephone conversations. Should diversity be equally proportional to society or not?
So this this is a question that often comes up. It's just like, okay, you're just hiring the best candidate, you're just hiring the best candidate, you're just hiring the best candidate. Yes, you should be hiring the best candidate, but where is your pool of candidates coming from?
Right.
That's what you have to look at. Is your lack of diversity in your pool of candidates due to the lack of access that the potential candidates have to your business? So it's just like, you're like, okay, I'm posting in all the same places. I'm getting a lack of diversity in the people that are applying. Are you posting in different places where there might be different types of people? It's just like if you had a different job. Like if you had a different job posting, like if you went from looking for HR manager to maybe a social marketing manager and somebody who specializes in social media, you won't be looking in the exact same places and posting on the same job boards for both of those positions. Are you looking in different areas for diverse candidates, and then picking from that pool who the best candidate? Because, and then also this is one of my big issues is that, there's so many things that we have to understand when we say, systemic racism and problems that are happening in the systems that exist. Like there's a real pipeline problem that is happening for many different industries of people not entering and not having access to proper education and the school systems and things like that. And this is a problem that Black people did not create. It's not like Black people, but they're called upon to fix this problem. And it's like, okay, well, so it's like, what are you doing to go back and fix the pipeline problem as well? Because this is not a system, so it's like, fix that pipeline, plus then look for a pool of candidates in different places. Because then you can still say, I'm hiring the best person, but you're increasing your pool, and I think that's one of the biggest issues.
What is Novita doing specifically? What have you implemented there?
Yeah, so we've done multiple things. One of the big things that we did is that we started this pledge with us, and we've had about 30 other PR agencies that have signed on to it. Some of it competitors and people that we've worked directly with and partnered with in the past. And this pledge, some of the things that we look at our own hiring practices, where we're going to start looking at if there is a diverse candidate that somebody ultimately did not hire, that we said we will share that candidate with others. We'll start looking at pro bono work that we can do for small businesses that are diverse business owners. So this pledge has many different steps of ways that we can both use our expertise and changing our hiring practices to diversify our staffs and give small businesses and different businesses that are doing good and doing social good the access to PR.
Very, very smart. Oren had a follow-up question to his earlier one, which is how do you do that based on what you were saying about it widening the pool? How do you do that past Indeed and Glassdoor?
Partnering with different schools, historically Black colleges and universities, they have their own job boards that they look at. Look at those that the schools that have programs in whatever field it is. If somebody has a strong communications or PR, department, I'm like, I want to look at that as well, so that's one thing that you can do. And that does not take a lot more work. That's like an extra looking at a different job board, looking at new job boards, looking at the different schools that have strong programs. It's like 30 more minutes of work, that's the thing that, it's not a lot more work. But yeah, it's one of those things that I think it's no different than if you were hiring. I always say this, that like, when people start to change their hiring practices, they're like, okay, I don't know where to start, and they get kind of paralyzed by that. They're like, I don't know what direction to go, and it's like, there's a ton of resources out there. Just Googling where to find diverse candidates or where to find Black candidates, if that, and there's a ton of results that will come up. And historically, Black colleges and universities are one of the first places to always start.
I had the head of diversity for Adobe on my other podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she said literally word for word almost the exact same thing. She goes, "Look out there; they're there. They do exist." Yeah. Has anything surprised you since you've really started doing this? What has surprised you more than anything else?
Yeah, so I have been, over the recent years, I've been pretty jaded on diversity issues. I've done a lot of work, but I've been pretty pessimistic. But over the past few months, I've been a little more. I was a little more optimistic, than I had been. I'm like, you know what? I think real change might actually start to happen. That we might start to make progress on these issues, of diversity. And not just diversity, but then once people get in, the discrimination that they feel like, I think there's a lot of eye-opening that's happening with the one of the things that I'm pleasantly surprised at is that we're starting to look at the mental health effects of racism. That's one of the things that I'm really pleasantly surprised about, because it's the feeling that I feel when I see a police officer is a lot different than a lot of people, and the stress and the anxiety that comes from that, and then there's just, that's on a very macro level. But then when you start to look at the workplace, there's so many microaggressions that happen. There's so much discrimination that happens that people don't even realize, and for Black people, it was for so long, there was no outlet to even talk about it. Like you couldn't even bring it up. The only time that you brought it up is amongst your friends, and amongst maybe your Black colleagues and things like that. That was the only safe space to talk about it. And that wears on you. And I think now we're starting to address some of that discrimination as an HR issue and the actual impact that it has on Black people. It's like, hey, this is an HR issue, like many other issues that we've addressed in the workplace, that there's still so much discrimination and things that happen in the workplace that we still need to work on. But this is one of the ones that you're like, you know what, let's put it in the same. But let's start to really look at it and examine it the same way that we look at, women's issues, in the workplace, where it took so long for us to make any progress on that. And we still have so far to go, but recognizing that there's a problem here, I think, is a big first step.
A lot of my other sort of life is I'm massively ADHD, and I host a podcast called Faster Than Normal, which focuses on neurodiversity as a gift, not as a curse. And one of the things I found is that when I talk to companies, big and small, and I say, hey, studies are out that say close to 25% of your workforce in the next 10 years is going to be neurodiverse. How are you planning on hiring them? How are you planning on keeping them? How are you planning on selling to your audience? And all of a sudden it becomes a real monetary issue. And I find that the second it becomes a monetary issue, they listen even more.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was working with a restaurant who said, well, we really want to improve. We did everything for our doors can fit mobility scooters. And I go to their, we want to attract neurodiverse, and I go to their menu and they have 125 items on a rotating digital menu with ads that overlay it. I wanted to shoot myself in the head. I'm like, no, this is not okay. Let's go to In-N-Out Burger where they have hamburger, cheeseburger, fries, shake, and you're done, right? So it's that same thing when they realize, holy crap, this could be costing us millions, if not billions. It was a wake-up call.
Yeah, and that goes to policy and practice. Both things need to happen. One thing for the practice needs to follow that policy. Like there's companies that have done well. I actually heard about a company that one of my friends they were consulting for a company that had started paternity leave, and they're like, it was this big thing. They were like, yes, we're really touting it. It's paternity leave. We're going to have it, and then a year later they went back and said, so how's it going? Not one person had used it because they did not feel comfortable and thought that it would be used against them in the future. And it's like, okay, you established a policy, but have you created an environment where it can actually be used?
Allows for it. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's just like, it's the same thing that you were saying, where people were like, okay, we're going to make some changes. We're going to do some things to the policy. But then when it came to actually implementing something, they were like, they fell short,
The same thing in the customer experience world where companies, we put our customer centric, customer first, and you can do anything to make the customer happy, except no one does it because they're afraid they're going to get fired.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Crazy. Yeah. Joseph, this is a phenomenal conversation. I definitely want to have you back again. I heard your Cision interview a couple of last month, I think it was really good as well. So where can people find more? Where can they find you?
So I'm on Instagram, J_Cephas, and also you can follow our my company, Novita PR.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Guys, thanks for watching 20 Minutes in Lockdown. We will see you again probably next week with another interview from someone who is more than likely at their home, in their office, in their living room. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.